All right, let's get started, shall we? Okay, so welcome everyone. A very warm welcome to our Professional Learning Reset webinar series. This is episode one, session one, however you want to call it, and we decided to call it exactly what we mean by the Professional Learning Reset and to sort of set the tone for the whole series, why traditional professional development fails, and what actually drives professional growth. So welcome everyone and keep introducing yourself. We do expect to engage with you throughout the webinar. So before I hand it over to Colin to lead the webinar, we just want to tell you a little bit more about ourselves and why we're doing this webinar. So a little bit about EduEnhance. EduEnhance has an extensive history. Our founder, Iram, who's on the call, has been active in education for several decades, started out as a teacher and then started learning centers. And through that, EduEnhance happened in 2019. Since 2019, we have been bringing world-class innovation tools to the region. You may have heard of iReady, of Curriculum Associates. So we started with them and then very soon expanded into other areas. And something that has really helped us grow in the region is our commitment to localization, to recognizing the needs of our educators, our leaders, our schools, our students, and our families in the region. So we're really committed to localization. And a part of that is the service and the support we offer. So we take a lot of pride in handholding and providing professional development for our tools to our partner schools and actually have some exclusivity in that aspect as well from the schools, from the partners that we work with. We're really proud of that. And that experience has led us to do what we are doing here with you today. So on the next slide, we want to give you a quick snapshot just to reassure you of all of how we work across the region. We've got a growing snapshot of schools across the region. I hope you see your country represented here. And if it's not, do let us know where you're from and we hope to work with you over there. And we hope to keep going as well. It's been truly a privilege to work with all types of schools in these territories and to learn more about what the needs are of schools across the region. And of course, believe it or not, professional development is a critical need across the board. So as we stepped into professional development, we learned a lot about the common challenges, time constraints, budget constraints, tracking progress, measuring results, motivating teachers. These are challenges that you see pretty much across the board, whether the school is in Morocco or in Saudi Arabia. But we also realize that in our schools in the region, there's an extra layer, there's an additional layer or several additional layers of challenges, such as so if you click on the next button, we'll see the challenges pop up. High teacher turnover, the diversity of teaching backgrounds. Often you may realize you're not teaching the curriculum that you were trained to teach in. There's limited local PD resources and expertise, and a huge pressure to balance many different expectations, whether it's just the expectations from the curriculum that you're teaching, or regional expectations, or government expectations. So we saw a need, and we're always here to serve a need. And that's how we stepped into professional development. Moving on to the next slide. Our vision for supporting professional development, however, goes beyond just providing a platform, providing a workshop. What we're seeing is the opportunity to empower schools with a holistic system. So we're building an end-to-end solution where you do have which is powered by a powerful platform called Iris Connect. But then we also have localized, regionalized professional development courses and then also supporting schools very excitingly with setting up their instructional and empowering the instructional and leadership coaching programs. And we realize that the key to that is to work with you end to end, right from the consultation process all the way to actually delivering the solutions to you. And this is actually the first time we are discussing the launch of our platform, Inusara, which will provide professional development resources to schools as well as to educators individually. So do keep an eye out to learn more about that. And here is a little window into the types of programs we aim to offer through Inusara. We've got empowering middle leaders. There's a little bit of a typo on the slide over there, but we've got empowering middle leaders. So there will be 7 modules in this course, and if you complete all 7 modules, you get an accredited certification. And then we were also working on the UA School Inspections Readiness course as well. And then moving on to the next slide, we've got a course on early childhood educators. If any of this resonates with you, do let us know in the feedback form towards the end or even on the chat. And also, very importantly, we're looking at offering personalized instructional coaching and leadership coaching from really experienced educators and leaders such as Colin, and making that accessible to educators around the world as they look to expand their reach and work across the region. And with that, I'm actually ready to hand it over to Colin. Before I do, I'd love to introduce Colin to you. Colin is the founder and director of Penfold Education. He brings over 40 years of experience supporting schools, teachers, and education systems in 16 countries. Colin began his career as a secondary mathematics teacher, which you will notice in the details and technicalities he likes to get into. But he went on to hold national leadership roles in the UK, including as a director of the UK government's national strategies, where he developed national guidance and training materials to improve teaching and learning and support school improvement. Since 2010, Colin has mostly focused on leading education reform and development programs across the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Brunei. From 2016 to 2022, he was lead advisor for teacher development at Education Development Trust. So without further ado, I'm just going to hand it over to Colin to dazzle you with his presentation.
Okay, I don't know about dazzle, but thank you, Bushra. It just makes me sound old. Um, just to say, first of all, I don't intend to talk for all of this webinar. I've tried to build in some activities to get you thinking, to get you reflecting. The other thing is, I would like you at any stage to post any questions or any comments in the chat. So we're going to keep watching this. Um, when we're looking at this particular webinar, as Bushra said, this is really an introduction. So it's beginning to say, well, okay, where are we? Over the last 20 years, there's been lots and lots of research that's looked at the impact of teacher professional development. And the research base has shown that teacher professional development can really have an impact both on teaching, but actually more importantly on student outcomes. So some of the recent research from Education Endowment Fund actually showed that what you had there was that teacher PD could lead to an average gain of 1 month for every student. That's average. But actually, effective PD was more than 2 months gain by students. But unfortunately, a lot of the PD was no gains. So the question is, what makes PD effective? What is it that's actually causing failure? What is it that's causing success? So what we're going to do is to begin to look at that in this session. So what I'm proposing to do is we'll focus on why does PD fail? What are some of the problems? What are some of the issues? And then begin to have a look at some of the characteristics of effective PD. Now, this is literally a whistle-stop tour. So we'll be introducing some of these things, but in future webinars, if people are interested, we can go into much more detail about what these things look like in practice. But okay, you've sat quietly enough already. So I hope you've all got your phones at the ready, because what you've got on the screen here is a QR code. So I'm really hoping that if you scan this QR code, this is going to take you to a little bit of a survey, a little bit of a questionnaire. So all I want you to do is there are 6 statements in this questionnaire. All I want you to do is to think carefully about each statement, maybe about 30 seconds each. When you think about the statement, then decide for each one whether you strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree or strongly disagree, and make your selection. So do that for each of the 6 statements. I see Bushra has pasted the other link into the chat in case you can't get it from the QR code. And I'm going to leave you for 2 or 3 minutes just to do that. And then what we'll do is we'll just have a look at what you think. Now, there's no right or wrong answer. Don't try and think, what do I want you? I don't want you to say anything. I want you to think what you actually believe. So let's see what happens. Okay, 2 or 3 minutes. If anyone's got any problems, paste in the chat. When you think you've achieved it, when you've done it, you could say done. Thank you. First person's done. I'm not going to look at the results until another couple of minutes when I hope everybody has actually completed this. You see, I love it when people are typing done at the very least because it means people are listening, they're participating.
I can't see.
I think to just moderate the webinar better, it's really encouraged that we drop our questions in the chat box
Yeah.
so we can keep up with them, and we're keeping a close eye on the chat box.
I'm going to give 30 more seconds. And then once we begin to have a look at the results and I'm beginning to talk through things, again, if you have questions or if you have comments on anything, please drop them in the chat. Can people begin to see these results coming through? So you've got 26. So we're almost halfway through. 27. Those who haven't posted yet, don't be convinced by what other people say. Someone says they cannot see the questions. As I say, if you'd scan the QR code or further up in the chat, have you put the form in there again, Bushra? Yeah, the form is in there again. So if you click on the form in the chat, that'll take you there. Okay, I'm going to begin to go through some of these now and have a look to see what we think. So, pedagogy is what teachers think, say, and do in the classroom. So, we've got 65%-ish agreeing. Most people agreeing or strongly agree. I'm going to come back to this in a moment. I think this is interesting. When we look again, most professional development is ineffective. What have we got here? Oh, we got less agreeing, but we got quite a few that are not sure. What's that? Almost 50% though are disagreeing with that statement. So that's going to be interesting. We'll come back to that in a second as well. Strong proportion of people saying yes to that question about teacher professional development, improving students' learning. So let's have a look at 4 there. Time and resources allocated to professional development are used in ways. So we've got 51% agreeing and 17%. Oh, just drop there. There we go. So most people are actually agreeing with that. And I think that's fascinating because I was going to pick up on this because this is one of the issues that is frequently complained about and completely. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Colin, are you back with us?
I was saying apologies for that. In 3.5 years of living here, this is the first time I've had a power cut.
I was doing a horrible Colin impersonation, which failed, so I will now hand it back to you.
Okay, no, that's fine. Let's quickly go through some of the things that's actually there. So if we can scroll, you're going to have to scroll through the screen. So the time and resources one, it was interesting. Some recent research in England was shown that statement. And in that particular statement, there was only 27% of teachers in England agreed that there was enough time. Now, if some of you saw some of the video I did recently, I think time is a big issue. We can't have effective professional development that's crammed at the end of a school day when people are already tired. We can't have effective professional development that's at the beginning of a school year when teachers are already thinking about too much And there is so many things that teachers are having to think about. It's cognitive overload. It doesn't work. And what's the point of having professional development at the end of a term when everyone's completely exhausted and there's no time to practice, no time to to embed what you've learned into your actual teaching? So this is something that I think we need to look at. Let's have a look through some of the other ones. Evaluate the effectiveness of teacher PD by its impact on student learning. So strongly agreeing with that one. Brilliant. And that's one of the issues we'll come back to in a second. And again, in terms of the individual, yeah, really interesting. So we've got quite a few different views on where things are. So what I want to do is to sort of look through all of these things as we go forward. So if we can go on to the next slide, Bushra. Okay, so this relates to the third and the fifth questions that's there. It really is about teacher PD is about improving professional development of teachers. I disagreed with a statement recently on LinkedIn. Some of you might have seen if you follow me, where someone was saying, "Oh, we need more time for support for teachers on how to invest, more time for them in terms of their pensions and preparing for their pensions." And I disagreed, not because I think that isn't important, because it is, but there's a difference between professional development as a teacher and personal development. And what we're going to focus on here and what we're looking at is the professional development. And this is what the professional development is about. It's about what happens that improves teachers' skills, but actually has an impact on students' learning. And that's what we're going to be focusing on. So let's have a look at some of the problems in more detail. So this one. Now, this was the first question, and I thought it was fascinating that many of you were agreeing with the statement that pedagogy was teaching practice. And actually, what the research says and what researchers say is that no, it isn't. Teaching practice is what actually happens in the classroom. That's what teachers think, that's what teachers say. But pedagogy is so much more. And there is this difference. So pedagogy is about what teachers know. It's about the knowledge base that they have. Pedagogy is also about what teachers' beliefs and practices are. And this is one of the main problems, that often teacher professional development focuses just on saying, here's what you need to do in your classroom. And what it doesn't do is actually address issues associated with what teachers believe, with what their attitudes are. It doesn't address what their knowledge is. Now, if you think about it, if we just say, here's what you do in your classroom, and we don't give people enough background information, enough support, enough knowledge, they can't do it. It doesn't work. It doesn't translate. Can you imagine that what I said to, I was training somebody who was going to be a surgeon, and I said, well, all you've got to do here is I need you to cut this bit open here, take this out, and then stitch it back up again. And I didn't explain why. I didn't explain what the risks and issues were. I didn't explain what the benefits. It would lead to a disastrous bit of surgery. And unless we're careful, that's what happens in teaching if we don't develop the knowledge. It's also an issue, and I'll come back to this in a moment, because what we don't do is actually develop correct theory. Now, this is the second problem that's here, which is known about for years, which is the theory-practice gap. So the most common problem, I think, I'm practicing this today in some ways, so this is not good. But what happens is teachers just sit and they listen to what somebody else is telling them. So they sit in workshops, sit in seminars, go to conferences, listen, get the theory, but then they're not able to put that into practice. And that's what most traditional PD does. The key thing is effective PD, the expert input doesn't stop after a workshop. The expert input actually supports teachers to put things into practice. Expert input recognizes that you don't just sit back, have a workshop, and then you go back to your classroom and everything's brilliant. It takes time, and it's a gradual process of building in the new learning that's there. And so effective PD has really got to support teachers to put things into practice. And again, I said something on LinkedIn recently. effective support isn't the same as monitoring. If what you have is you have some PD, and then teachers are told, go back to your classrooms and put this into practice now. And then what happens is people just come and observe your lessons and grade you and make judgments. That's not supporting you. That's causing anxiety. And it's not helping you to take those gradual steps that lead to improvement. So the phrase I'd use is, you can keep measuring the height of a plant, but if you don't water it and feed it, that plant's not going to grow. So moving from theory into practice is really important. Next problem. Okay, this is some research that was carried out by Education Endowment Foundation. Again, you can see in 2021. And it was about ineffective or insufficient PD mechanisms. So what Education Endowment Foundation and this research showed was that there were 4 groups of things that would happen. So it's building knowledge, it's motivating teachers, it's developing teaching techniques, and it's embedding practice. Now, what the research found was that if all of those 4 were there, that was likely to be effective and lead to improvements in classroom and improvements in student outcomes. But if there was only one of those things there, like, for example, it was only about building knowledge, then it was going to be not very effective. And importantly, there's different mechanisms under each of those 4 groups that's there. And what the research showed was the more of those mechanisms that are in place, the more effective research is going to be. So I'm failing today on managing cognitive load, which is an important bit, because actually you need to focus on only a little bit at a time in terms of developing new knowledge and supporting teachers to embed that for that to happen. So unfortunately, most of the PD I see or I observe or I hear about happening, again, fails in this instance. So it only has one group, or maybe 2 groups, but it doesn't have all 4 groups and it doesn't have all of the mechanisms. So I want to pause there. So if we have a look, I've talked about some of the problems. I've seen there's questions and things that's going in. And I can see there's some things that's coming through there. What I'd like you to do again is just a little bit of thinking now. I want you to think, so if we go on to the next slide, I've talked about some of the negatives. Talking about the negatives is great. And in the future webinars, what we need to do is to come up with some very precise examples about what we can do to tackle these problems. But I want you to begin to think about effective professional development that you've participated in. By effective, I mean it's changed student outcomes. Not just your practice, it's changed student outcomes. Think about it. Why was it effective? What was it that happened? How were those problems I've just mentioned addressed? So again, have a think and begin to paste some comments and things in the chat. Abdul, great to connect with you after quite a few years from Sierra Leone. And answering your question, I'll come back to that a little bit later, if that's okay. So Maha, you've said practical strategies ready to use in the classroom. But again, I'm just going to come back to challenge you a little bit about that, is you've got to have the knowledge why those strategies are there. And I'm going to come on to this in a second. But also you still need to be supported to embed them. So one of the problems is, let's imagine we were teaching somebody to fly. And what I do is I have them in a room and I say, okay, if you're flying the plane, when you want to take off, this is what you've got to do. Now go and get into the plane yourself and take off. You're likely to crash. So you might have a practical strategy, but you need to be supported to actually put that into practice. Any other comments on positive PD? No? Absolutely. And so the question is, what is it that makes it change teachers' practice? That's Lieber, I think. Okay, let me move on because of time and try and push through some of this. So, what we know from the research and what I know from my experience is that effective PD helps teachers to know about, but what it also does is help teachers to know how. To know about and to know how. And the knowing about bit is actually those elements that you can see there. So it's learning about the theory of effective practice. And I'm going to come through some of this in a moment. It's also seeing effective practice. So again, if I'm being brutally honest here, reading about a strategy is very different from seeing it happen. So I can talk about the gradual release of responsibility model that you've all probably heard about, but it's different for you hearing me talking about it and describing it by a picture than actually seeing somebody put that into practice effectively. If I'm teaching somebody to drive a car, it's different telling them, if it's a manual car, how to change gear, and then actually showing them how to change gear. So knowing about encompasses both learning about and it's about seeing. Knowing how is then beginning to get into applying it in the classroom. And that's where teachers have to apply it to their own context because every classroom is different. Every group of students you have is different. And as I said earlier, expert input should still happen here. So it's not that you have an expert who runs a workshop and demonstrates and then they walk away. The expert supports you to put it into practice in your classroom. And you scaffold it. And then it's gradually, bit by bit, the teacher is able to do this. And the final stage is about reflection. And reflection is where learning really happens. It's where you see what's happening, you analyze it, and you learn from it, and you take it to the next level. And again, expert input is most effective there also. So expert input occurs at all four of those processes. So can we move on to the next slide? So these are 10 principles I've put together I'm going to highlight very quickly. In an ideal world, I'd do one of them now, and then we'd stop and say goodbye, and then we'd come back to each one. So there is going to be a bit of, as I said, cognitive overload. But I want to take you through all of these bit by bit. Some of these principles directly reflect some of the problems I mentioned earlier. So, for example, Principle 10, you'll notice there says creates and resolves cognitive conflict. I'll say what I mean by that in a moment, but that is something that's designed to really focus on teachers' beliefs and attitudes. Principle 3, integrating theory and practice. We've talked about that, the theory-practice gap, and how does that actually work? And all of the principles here are based on all of the research. It's not just me sitting thinking, here's what works. It's research on things like Helen Timperley, Sims, and others that we can give you copies of. But the key thing is it's all based on teachers being part of a supportive environment also. And by a supportive environment, this is an environment which encourages teachers to participate in PD. It encourages and supports teachers to put it into practice. It encourages teachers to be risk takers. It encourages teachers and supports them rather than grading them and making judgments. So I'm going to go through each of these 10 principles very quickly before we go into the next activity. I'm trying to look through some of the questions here. Can we apply core subject PD strategies and techniques to non? And the answer is it depends, but yes. So the first thing I'm going to say fairly quickly, I want to go over this, is that this is about everything we do should be focusing on student outcomes. So effective PD actually starts with where are the students? What is the change that we need to happen within those students? Where are the weaknesses? And that could be related to a particular bit of subject. So it might be students are not very good, for example, at multiplication. So therefore, that leads us into saying, what's our teaching of multiplication like? And then saying, how do we develop that? It might be that students are not very good at talking to each other in the classroom. So again, what do we do to improve the talking over in the classroom? So it's focusing on student outcomes and evaluating against student outcomes also. Let's move on to the second one. Okay, the evidence base. Um, Unfortunately, much of the PD that I've seen over the course of many years hasn't focused what the research says. I'm sorry to say it, it often focuses on individual people's thoughts, beliefs, opinions, rather than what the real research base says. Um, and PD should be focused and should be based on real research. I think I said relatively recently, one of the problems we've had is that teachers get involved in things like learning styles because somebody says, oh, learning styles is important. And therefore, across the Emirates, we have people who are running training for teachers on learning styles. And here's what it means. There's absolutely no evidence base for learning styles. In fact, most of the research evidence says it is rubbish. And if anything, it has a negative impact on student outcomes. But the problem is people attend training on it. So we shouldn't be surprised if that's what we're training on, it doesn't lead to improvement. So PD should be really focused on robust research evidence about what improves learning. Moving on. Theory practice gap. I don't want to talk about this because we've talked about it already, but it is how do we move from theory into practice? So Tim Rowland and others did a lot of work on this, which is in the research references I've put together. But part of it is how do you move from your knowledge as a teacher to being able to use that to support students in the classroom? And how do you change that knowledge into something that's going to be helpful? And again, we could spend a long time talking about what that looks like. Moving on. Now, this comes back to what somebody was saying about time. So I want to spend a little bit about this. Professional development is gradual and it takes time. So we've got to stop thinking professional development is training. It's a workshop. No, it isn't. Professional development is moving through this process of beginning to learn about something, beginning to see what it looks like, beginning to be supported to embed it in practice, and beginning to reflect on it, and then that process starting again. So what all of the research evidence shows is that effective professional development goes through that cycle continuously. So it might be that we have a workshop on one very focused thing, such as how do we manage students' wrong answers. We discuss that, we look at it, we look at what the research evidence says. What we then do is begin to see how a teacher manages that in practice. So again, there's expert input in that. What we then do is begin to put it into practice in our own classrooms, and there's expert input to support us putting it into practice, and there's coaching, and coaching is a really important part of this. And then what there might be is the teachers get together in their team and they look at their own practice and they talk about what's going well and what isn't. And if necessary, you go back and you revisit that again in another workshop. Or you might then move on to the next stage. But it's this cyclic, gradual process. One of my big issues with professional development is it's seen as one-off individual events, and that's never going to have any impact whatsoever. Okay. So, external expertise. I've talked about this already, but what we know from the research is external expertise is really, really important. And that's partly because that doesn't always exist in the school. So, how can we, if we've never experienced something ourselves, begin to teach and support others in how to implement that? Expertise really helps teachers to understand what the effective practice looks like. And it helps them to put that into practice bit by bit. Why it works, how it works. And it isn't about taking control away from teachers. What it's about is strengthening professional judgment. It's about building a shared understanding. And it's about increasing the likelihood that changes are going to embed and be part of the practice as we go forward. Okay, so there's 5 things that I've talked about there. I'm just going to pause for 1 second just to see if anybody's got any questions about that particularly. Those 5 things that have gone through. If there's nothing burning, please keep putting things in the chat. We'll then move on to the sixth one. Okay, let's move on to the sixth principle. Effective PD provides teachers with structured opportunities to work together, not just to share ideas, but to make sense of the evidence, to talk about what the research evidence says, to practice new ideas together and to learn from each other. One of the problems I mentioned before is teachers take part in the workshop, then they go away to their classroom by themselves. Effective PD actually continues and teachers work together the whole time. The workshop or the training is just the start of that collaboration. And what we know is that when teachers discuss practice together, they're more likely to notice what's working than if they're doing that individually. They're more likely to question assumptions than if they're working individually. And therefore, they're more likely to improve things. Again, the research shows that teachers working together is most effective when it's focusing on real classroom practice that's linked within that school, and it's within the classrooms and the teaching that's occurring within that school. And it's not about exchanging opinions. One of the things that's really, really powerful here are something called video clubs. And I know a few people who know me who are as part of this workshop know I'm very, very strong advocate of video clubs. This is where teachers can come together and actually look at each other's practice and discuss what's going well, discuss how to improve things further, discuss what the issues are. So it's actually looking at a short extract of one of your colleagues actually teaching and talking about it together in a supportive way. So we know that is very, very effective. Okay, seventh. I don't know what you feel about this, but again, the research actually shows that professional development is most effective when leaders, and that can be middle leaders, but it should also be senior leaders, are actually active participants. I've seen a number of times recently where what happens is the senior leaders will organize a professional development session and then they go away and they're not part of it. We know that leads to learning not being so effective and not being embedded so well. So Helen Timperley has shown quite clearly when leaders are active participants, when they work alongside teachers, they're sending powerful messages about what is important. It also means that it becomes the shared responsibility. So let's imagine, rather than teachers being part of a workshop, then being going away and the leaders say, now get on and put this into practice, and then going away and observing lessons and grading them on it. If it was all about the leaders are part of that, and then the leaders are supporting the teachers to work in their classrooms, responsibility is suddenly shared. And everybody is responsible for trying to ensure that things have difference in the classroom. So it means leaders are modeling curiosity, modeling openness, modeling a willingness to learn, and actually taking on responsibility. So next, and this comes back to what somebody said before, pedagogical content knowledge. Those who know me know I could talk for years about pedagogical content knowledge. But often what we have is professional development that just focuses on the general stuff of teaching. But teachers don't just teach, they teach a subject. They teach mathematics, or they teach English, or they teach science, or Arabic, or Islamic studies, or whatever it is. And teaching those particular aspects has got specific bits of knowledge that you need to know about. So for me, for example, if I'm teaching mathematics, I need to know what are good models to teach fractions. What does the research say are appropriate examples to use if I'm teaching students about fractions? What does research say are the common misconceptions when students are learning fractions? And that's all pedagogical content knowledge. So again, when we're planning and thinking about what is effective professional development, we've got to think about the generic pedagogical knowledge that's needed, the general teaching stuff, but we've got to think about the subject-specific stuff that's there as well. And too often schools ignore the subject specific stuff, in my opinion. Okay, moving on. This is the hardest thing. And again, I'm hoping we'll spend more time on this. But effective professional development really gets teachers to reflect on and reflect in practice. Now, reflection isn't just about that thing at the end of a lesson observation where you say, this went well. That's not reflection. Reflection is thinking about the practice and beginning to really analyze it and then beginning to use it to improve and change your practice. Now, for me, and I'm not original with this, but there are two bits of reflection. There's reflection on practice and there's reflection in practice. PD needs to support both of those, particularly reflection on practice. So that's where you look at a past lesson. You think about a lesson that you taught recently. You look at a lesson that your colleague taught and you think, okay, what went well? What do I understand about the key issues that's there? What was significant? So you're thinking about that lesson in the past and you're beginning to learn. Reflection in practice is where actually a teacher notices something significant in the lesson and they respond on their feet. They think on their feet and they can say, Bushra, really interesting that you said that. Iram, can you actually explain why you think Bushra might have said that? It's not something you can plan for. It's something that just happens, where you see something and you see it as an opportunity to learn. Now, all of the research shows that actual reflection in practice is really hard, and most teachers struggle with that. But actually, if what we do is develop reflection on practice, we know that helps teachers to get better at reflecting in practice. If they can look at a lesson that's happened and say, oh, that was really significant, and then can turn around to Bushra and say, Bushra, why did you do that in the lesson? That helps them in their own lessons to think, that's significant. Why did that student do that? So reflection on and reflection in practice is really important. And this is where coaching plays such an important part. Hopefully, we might do some webinars on coaching if people are interested to do some more support on coaching, as Bushra was saying at the beginning. But that's what effective coaching does. It gets people to reflect. And that's what things like video clubs, teacher learning communities do. It gets teachers to reflect. It provides opportunities for reflection. Okay, final principle. Creating and resolving cognitive conflict. So this is the mental discomfort that you feel when someone challenges your ideas. It's when you're shown a piece of evidence that actually suddenly it makes you think, I'm not sure I know what I was saying here. This contradicts what I was believing. And what the research shows is that creating and resolving cognitive conflict is a really important part of professional development. And this goes back to what we were saying earlier about pedagogy being about beliefs and knowledge as well as just practice. So let me give you a practical example. If as a teacher, I think children learn best by listening to what I say and copying my methods, if that's what I believe, and if then I go to a PD session that says, no, you can't do it that way, you've got to get children to think for themselves, you've got to get them to talk. If my beliefs don't change, my practice isn't going to change. It might only change when somebody comes in to observe me teach, because I think this is what they want to see happening. But it doesn't change overall. So the creation and the resolving of cognitive conflict is really important. That's one of the things I was wanting to try and do at the beginning there by just asking you, what did you believe? Getting to see what you think. And if we had more time, we'd begin to address and work on those. Okay, that's a whistle-stop tour through the 10 statements. So again, what I'd like you to do now is, again, Bushra, you can possibly paste the link in the chat for this. But what we'd like you to do is to look at the QR code or go to the link in the chat. And I want you to think about your professional development that you've experienced or the professional development that's currently happening in your school. And I want you to rate it against those 10 principles. So if you think, for example, it really focuses on student outcomes, then what you might do is say, oh, that's 5. And if you think it doesn't really reflect or focus on reflection on and reflection on practice, you might say, well, that's just a one. So all I'm interested to do is to get a feeling for where you think you are. And again, this will help us as we go forward also to identify maybe what we should be supporting you with. Everybody okay with that? And again, if you've got any comments or questions, paste them in the chat and let us know when you've done that. Viva, I see what you're saying about the support of leaders really motivates, and that support is rare. And again, dare I say, this is one of the reasons why traditional PD and PD at the moment isn't actually working. It's because of that. When you've gone through, just let us know. The link is above you there, Faiza. If you see Bushra has posted it into the chat there. Can we just have a look at some of the results coming through, Bushra?
Sure, just give me a second to pull that out and share the screen. Well, more than a second. Okay, we've got 17 responses. Shall I share the screen now or shall we wait a minute?
Wait a little bit more.
We've got 19 now.
We've got 22 in there now. Do you want to share the screen?
In the interest of time, we'll do that. I've got it over here. Can you see it, Colin?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah, yeah. I've also got it on my screen as well, so. So one of the reasons for doing this is because I think it helps us to identify, but it helps you to identify what are the things that you can improve. What are the things that can improve in your schools? So, for example, if we have a look at the first thing on focusing on student outcomes, we've got 37% think it's very effective, but we've got 2%, sorry, 8% that are saying, two that are saying it's not very effective. Okay, so that's quite a big issue. When we have a look at the evidence base, most people are saying it reflects the evidence base, which is good. But we need all of these ultimately to be at fives. And look at your own school. So if I go through some of these things, Let's have a look at one particularly that I thought was really interesting before. If we have a look at integrating theory and practice, and this is the most important thing in many ways, it's one of the key principles. There's quite a spread that's there, and there's only 5 of you who said it's very effective. So hopefully what this can do is help you begin to think, what is it that you can do in your schools? But what we need is some help from you. What is it that we should focus on to help you? Okay. Are we okay to share these responses with people? Do you think, Bushra? Because they're all anonymized.
Yeah, absolutely. We can put it in the follow-up email.
Yeah, cool. Okay, can we move on to what is really almost my final slide because of time? Okay, so I've just taken the slide I showed earlier and I've just added a little bit to it. So we've got those 4 processes, and what I'm saying is effective PD covers all 4 of those processes. So it takes learning from the learning about through the seeing to the applying in the classroom and through reflecting. And that means when it comes to the forms of PD, it will include potentially self-study, workshops, conferences, observing each other. It'll cover one thing at least from under each of those 4 cogs, if you like, under each of those 4 processes. So again, if you think of your own school, if, for example, you've got a bit of PD which takes you from, let's say it's about how do we support students to talk to each other, if it includes something that's connected with some workshops, seeing other teachers doing it, getting some feedback and support on your teaching, some coaching, if it includes all of those, it's likely to be effective. If it only includes one of those, it isn't. And this is where, for example, again, technology can come. So things like Iris Connect that Bushra mentioned earlier is really important in supporting coaching. And there's AI coaching that's embedded within it, as well as supporting, for example, coaching by a real life coach. Now, I'm just conscious on time because of the issue I had before. We're beginning to run out. But what I'd like you to do is to think about possible areas for improvement in your school, what questions you have, if there's anything you want to ask us. And there's also a sort of closing evaluation form. I'm sorry that this has been a bit of a rush through. Hopefully, at least it's got some thoughts going. And what we can begin to do is to say, what might you be interested in again in trying to think through this? What can we support you on? So here's a feedback form. So any comments or any questions from people? Please provide your feedback honestly, because that helps us know what we can do to support you better. We will share all of the references. We will share with you the handouts. So we will share, for example, the 10 principles and the 4 processes slides with you and all of the references that I've used. Libna, that's very kind of you. I hope it has been helpful, and I hope, as I say, other people feel the same. But any comments, any questions? Bushra, I'm going to hand back to you.
Sounds good. So first of all, thank you so much, Colin, for sharing your wisdom. It has been really informative for us at EduEnhance and has informed a lot of the work that we do. We're very grateful for it. And thanks for sharing it on this webinar as well. We hope that everybody gleaned a lot of insights from it. And that feedback form will really help us ensure that future webinars cater to your interests and your priorities. We do want to also inform you that at EduEnhance, it's exactly what we're doing with our new professional development offering. So do stay tuned to learn more and be part of it and create impact in your own practice, but also at your school. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you
And
very
again,
much.
if people have got specific things that they want to focus on in future, what we're going to be doing is much more specific, I hope.
Thank you all for your time this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one as well.